That's like bringing a machine gun to a
Kill a mosquito. And this is why Salesforce probably invests a ton of money in R&D.
We're going to see an explosion of these kind of niche model use cases.
65% of big companies are playing with agents. However, only 11% have them in production. Good, it's recording. Hello and welcome to the Generation AI podcast, where every week we talk about AI, data, business around AI, and what's been going on in the industry the week before that. We're at episode 9. How do you feel about that? We've come quite a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I think if only the podcast moves as fast as AI. I don't know about you, but I feel like it's difficult to keep up. There are so many things going on, and you get caught up in the day-to-day work. But there are so many different areas that are exploding right now. So yeah, looking forward to getting into it today.
And that's actually the goal of the podcast, to help people building software, building tech, busy people keep up with relevant things in AI without having to spend hours researching as we do for the podcast. So what are we going to go through today?
Well, I mean, there's a few different things on the agenda, right? Firstly, we're going to focus on LLMs, so from specialized to small language models, looking specifically at the Gartner study that came out around this topic. We're also going to be looking at the new AI unicorns that have recently been crowned. A unicorn is basically $1 billion company, but what companies have been raising in the world of AI and which companies have been crowned unicorns so far in 2025. And then finally, we're going to look at the enterprise AI adoption and how, I suppose, that's being measured, particularly looking at a survey by KPMG.
Right. So let's get through the first subject. As you were saying, we're going to look at the Gartner study. For people who don't know, Gartner is basically a market research company that's looking mostly into tech and how tech evolves over time. They're famous for the hype cycle in technology, basically mapping emerging technologies on a hype cycle. We'll talk about it in a second. But the reason why I brought up this topic is we talk about language models quite a lot on the podcast. They're hyped at the moment. They're very useful, but I feel like overvalued. And as the Gartner study shows, by 2027, a ton of companies will migrate from large language model to specialized small language model. And we're seeing this already with agents, with more specialized models working together to kind of achieve a goal cheaper and better. It turns out, as much as companies are bragging about their X billion parameter model, those models are very good for research, very good for benchmarks, very good for pushing the current standards, but they're not really what the market wants. The market wants specialized, small, niche models that can do the job, the specific job they have, way better.
So what exactly do we mean? Let's just take a step back. What exactly do we mean by a small language model?
Maybe I should rephrase this. It's not necessarily a small language model, but a small model, a generic model. So instead of having this huge, let's call it jack of all trades, master of none language model that can do a ton of things, a small model is something niche down on your specific need. Let's say a small classification model that can predict churn, a small language model just fine-tuned for law application, or a small language model fine-tuned for customer support. I'm talking models that are lighter on the GPU, cheaper to run, cheaper to fine-tune, that can achieve the work in the niche they're made for way better than a large counterpart.
And so I suppose to break this down a bit further, how would this work from an architecture perspective? Are we talking about, when we talk about a small language model, are we talking about a model that's built from scratch, from the ground up? Or are we talking about maybe something that's built on top of ChatGPT for a very specialized use case using a very narrow set of data? I suppose what my question is, as far as a small language model is concerned, are we talking about a full stack end-to-end model that's built from the ground up on its own? Or are we talking about a model built on top of the ChatGPT stack, but trained on a very specific set of data?
It's more the former and something that's in between the examples he just gave. Because once you build on top of ChatGPT, you're already using a large language model. And the whole point is to use from the get-go a smaller, more cost-efficient, more specialized model. So I would say it's either models trained from scratch, multiple such models that cooperate with each other maybe in an agentic manner, or something in between where you take a foundational, smaller and more niche model and fine-tuning for your own specific needs. Because let's say you have an assistant that has to do all sorts of things, it makes sense to use a large language model because it's, again, the jack of all trades, master of
General
none.
purpose, yeah.
Exactly. That's a better way to frame it. But once you have a very specific use case, let's say customer support, where you have to predict churn, get some responses, classify the customers, cluster them, put them into buckets. Instead of just using one big model hoping it will deliver results, you can have multiple specialized models working together in a way that each model is independently measurable. So you know, okay, what's the accuracy of my churn prediction model? What's the accuracy of my recommender engine, and so on. And of course, you asked, what does this mean from an architectural point of view? Of course, it's way more complicated to manage multiple small models than just having one big general purpose model. But I think this is where we're converging towards. Because, of course, for engineers, there's not a problem building infrastructures on top of multiple small components and orchestrate them towards a common goal. So from an engineering point of view, no problem building that. From an operational point of view, of course, you save time, you save money, you get more measurable results. You don't just depend on one provider. You kind of decentralize your access to AI. Some models you outsource, some models you train in-house, some models you use from third parties, and so on.
Yeah, I just think it's unrealistic to think that, like, for instance, let's take the language model as an example. The average company is not going to be building a language model. However, the average company, give it 5-10 years, is probably going to want to develop their own small language model or develop a language model on their own data. And I just wonder how that looks, because I can imagine that they're building on top of something like an open source stack or whatever, but I can't imagine they're building the end-to-end stack themselves, right? That's probably not going to happen. So I just wonder what that is likely to look like for the average company in, say, 3-4 years from now.
Of course, they're going to build their own tech stack. And we talked before about how some parts of the, let's say, AI stack get commoditized. Of course, they're not going to build their own GPUs. They're not going to build their own cloud. They're not going to build their own maybe language models. Maybe they will, or maybe they won't. But the point I'm trying to make here is that data will be the key differentiator.
Oh, for
and this
sure.
is exactly what Gardner points out as well. The more these kind of models get commoditized, data is a key differentiator, both in providing a great service for the customers and also for providing a new revenue stream. Basically, companies will be selling access to models fine-tuned with their data.
But let's take an example then, because I get what you're saying. You're saying that there's going to be the rise of small language models, and I agree with you. I don't think you need massive general purpose large language models trained on all of the internet ever to answer a customer service request. That's clearly not going to be the way forward. That's like bringing a machine gun to
kill a mosquito.
To kill a mosquito, exactly. So But then how? But then what you're saying is that all of these models that are available today are large language models, or large models in general. So my question to you is, okay, let's say I'm an average company and I'm just wanting to train a small model on my data. Um, do I have? Are there small model providers today that I can just kind of buy off the shelf and then train my data on? Or are general purpose large language models my only go-to right now?
There's so much more than meets the eye. So there's not just ChatGPT and Anthropic out there, and you're just limited to those two options. There's, of course, open source models. You can go to Llama Index and get whatever model you want. And people already start putting out fine-tuned models. So you might find a model that's better for your case, for your business problem, than a generic large language model. So you can go open source, you can build it from scratch. Of course, that's more expensive and not really feasible nowadays unless you're doing something super, super niche that needs specific training from scratch.
So it seems like what you're saying is that that you either have open source, like you can kind of go to Hugging Face or Llama Index or somewhere like this, or you have a massive large language model through Claude or OpenAI. But it seems, let's take Salesforce as the example, right? It's always a good go-to example. It's basically a blank piece of paper. You can build and set up your sales environment in any way you want. You can configure it in any way you want so that it's representative of your deals and your products and your salespeople. And it can be customized to a 2,000 person company, or it can be customized to a 20-person company. If we're using large language or small models, it seems like there's not a Salesforce for small language models today where I can just go and buy it off the shelf in a SaaS way and train my data on it, and then off I go. See, it seems like that's not available today. Is that fair?
You're right. There's no Salesforce model as a service provider nowadays, and this is why Salesforce probably invests a ton of money in R&D, so they can take a general purpose, small or of appropriate size language model and fine tune it on their data, so they can get the maximum quality out of what exists there in the open source.
Okay, last question for you, and then we'll move on. So why has this not happened yet? Why is there not like a small model as a service provider that I can just buy off the shelf and train on my data?
But this is happening. This is happening with the examples he just gave, Hugging Face, Llama Index, and probably other places where people place models.
It's not productized, right? These are just marketplaces ultimately.
Yes and no, because Llama Index, yes, it feels more like a marketplace. Hugging Face also exposes APIs, so you can just go there. If you can find someone or a model that was placed there by someone who trained it on the data you needed to be trained on, let's say sales data, you can just use it through an API. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of a marketplace situation, as I was mentioning before. Companies are training, fine-tuning models on their own data, and they can use them as a new revenue stream. They don't expose data, they don't leak it, but they offer access to the model trained on their proprietary IP. We'll be seeing more and more of this kind of marketplace situations.
I still think this is a winner takes all market. I don't think this is going to evolve into a marketplace because most buyers are not savvy enough. Most buyers just want a simple solution that they can plug in. And so there's power laws that exist in terms of distribution, whereby companies are not going to be, let's say the marketplace thing rules out, right? You're going to need one model for one use case, another model for another use case, and the whole thing will just become unmanageable for the average size company. Most companies are not sophisticated enough to to be running kind of multiple models and just buying them from a marketplace. Most of them just want an easy user interface software solution where they can easily just kind of click a button and spin up a model. We'll see how it plays out, but my gut tells me that it's going to go a similar way to SaaS. And, these marketplaces are cool, but ultimately someone's going to productize this, and it'll be a winner takes all market.
Here's why, and I'll give my take and then we'll move on to the next topic. Here's why I think this is not a winner takes all market. There's a long tail when it comes to companies building with AI. The majority of the companies will indeed use a general purpose, off-the-shelf, easy-to-use and integrate model. But the companies at the end of the tail, pushing the boundaries of AI, not being happy with the average quality of models, will be looking for specialized solutions. And here's where we come into play, right? We're not in the market to offer
let's clarify the situation though. If somebody takes 80% of the market, that's a winner takes all market. If you have one provider with 70% market share, that's a winner takes all market. Search is a winner takes all market. I mean, Google have 80% of search. There may be a long tail, but for 80%, if 80% of companies are using one or two providers, it's a winner takes all market, right?
I guess we can debate on the definition of winner takes all, but I'm still looking at those 20-30% of the companies who are pushing AI, and I think this is where we're focusing on mostly. But talking about companies in the tail, who's becoming a unicorn?
Well, exactly. So, it's interesting that I think each week our topics are unknowingly related. So, 25 unicorns have been born this year since 2025 begun. So companies that have essentially raised a round of funding at $1 billion valuation. These companies tend to fit into three buckets, really, I would say, across AI. You have the really early stage companies with huge opportunities that they're going after. So, for instance, companies that are raising a Series A or Series B, but they're raising like $200 million, and therefore they get $1 billion valuation at a very early stage of fundraising. And typically, these are companies that are going after massive total addressable markets. So an example of this, for instance, would be a company called Bot AI, whereby they're building robots for the home. So I think they've raised around 200 million at a Series A. Then you have, I suppose, what a later stage infrastructure plays, because most of the Gen AI use cases are being built out, right? But everyone agrees that the demand is going to be there. And so a lot of the late rounds of funding are more around infrastructure and building out capacity. So there's a company called Celestial AI. They've just raised a Series C round, $250 million at a $2.5 billion valuation. And this is an example of an infrastructure company that are just building out capacity for the coming AI wave. So on the one hand, we've got these big bets that are being taken, the likes of Bot, that are going to bring robots into all of our homes in a $200 million Series A. Then we've got the infrastructure play, which is obviously lower risk, but probably lower return in terms of Celestial AI. But the round that really stuck out to me, and this really, I suppose, chimes in with what you've been speaking about, is a company called Hippocratic AI. Now they've raised a $141 million Series B round at a $164 billion valuation. The reason why Hippocratic AI are cool is because this isn't like a long-term play in terms of a big moonshot bet. Neither is it a kind of short-term infrastructure play. But to your point, Hippocratic AI are building out small language models specifically for the healthcare industry. And so they're focused on building, I suppose, a more specific version of ChatGPT to go directly to the patients to deal with their chronic health conditions like diabetes or chronic pulmonary disease.
Here's what's interesting about this company, Hippocratic AI. They are doing, just to bridge it with the first topic we covered, they are doing the small language model version of healthcare, right? They're fine-tuning their own models. They're fine-tuning their own AI, hopefully, because last episode we talked about lies in AI. So hopefully they're using AI for real. They're fine-tuning it to fit the needs of a very specific niche, which is healthcare. And there's two things that confuse me. There's a huge investment and a huge valuation that throws them in the unicorn space. However, the AI they are using is more geared towards the admin side of healthcare rather than the diagnosis side. So based on what I checked, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, they're not building AI to provide diagnosis. They're not building AI to actually do healthcare. They are building AI to handle patient registrations.
It's not just that. No, that's not correct. Just to be clear, like the main use cases that they're focused on is actually with the client patient care. So it's not necessarily diagnoses, but nor is it administration. So they're focused on chronic care management. So things like daily check-ins, post-discharge follow-up, medication adherence support. So actually, the really key part is the basically the patient communication.
Patient experience, I think.
Patient communication, more importantly, because I suppose when you've got an aging population, those daily check-ins. So to be clear, this is not AI to replace healthcare professionals. This is AI to replace care workers. And actually, this is a massive growing problem because there's a lot of kind of high volume, low paid work happening in the care industry where you're making sure that somebody's taking their medication on time. You're making sure that somebody's having a healthy diet so that they're dealing properly with their diabetes. You're making sure that their insulin isn't too high, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these kind of hundreds of interactions that will need to happen, sometimes in a given week with somebody with a series of chronic health conditions. And essentially what it is doing is handing that experience from a care worker to an LLM.
And how do you incentivize patients already in a less than optimal situation to interact with a machine rather than with a human?
This is a question. Well, this is a good question for the CEO of Hippocratic AI, but I suppose that's the direction of travel, right? And you know, I suppose the TLDR is that the unit economics of healthcare work or care work specifically are really not great in terms of the amount of care and attention an elderly person will need, the pay of the average care worker being very low, and the fact that we have an exploding population of people aged over 60. There are going to need to be solutions in this area when you look at the demographic trends, right? And there simply aren't enough people in the care sector to actually meet that level of demand. So I think, long story short, like we're going to see, I agree with you. I think where we massively agree is that we're going to see an explosion of these kind of niche model use cases. And the comparison again I was thinking about was again the SaaS space. So in the early days of software, you had these monolithic service providers for things like marketing and sales and HR, and it would just be these system of record companies. And there's a really great chart, and maybe we'll show it in the show notes if we can. If you take the MarTech sector, just as an example, you had maybe, I don't know, 10 to 12 marketing technology SaaS companies in, say, 2008. And then every year, the number of logos on the chart, on the MarTech chart, mapping the MarTech industry, 2 or 3x every year for like 10 years. And I think we're going to see something similar in the model space for sure. That you're going to have these kind of a proliferation of vertical models. Okay, there's just one today in terms of Hippocratic AI, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 or 4 years in healthcare alone, if you have like 60 model companies easily. I think there's
Just
enough.
providing specialized models for a niche industry, in this case, healthcare. But just to go one step back, we talked about unicorns and how Hippocratic AI just became one. Who do you think, in terms of product or market niche, who will become the next unicorn? Or in what area we'll see the next 10 unicorns? What do you think?
I think it's all going to be in these kind of. Well, obviously there's a few different plays, right? But like, there's obviously an infrastructure play, but that's less interesting to us. Whereby there's going to be a ton of compute that's going to need to be built out to support all of these AI companies. So there's the infrastructure play. There's also going to be the proliferation of these general models and stuff built on top of the general models. But I think for the average person looking at this as a business opportunity, where is the actual opportunity? I think it's building out small models for specific use cases, for sure.
So going specific rather than going big.
Oh, for sure. But then it's all a case of how does that get built, right? That's still what is not understood right now. Like, let's for an average e-commerce company that wants to build a customer service bot and they want to build it on a small language model, what is their best way of doing that? I think that's going to be the key. Like, what does the tech stack look like for a small language model in 5 years' time? Is it that we've just got these kind of niche players and they all provide the end-to-end stack for each use case? Or do we instead have like maybe a platform for all small language use cases, and then you've got companies building on top of this platform for, I suppose, the execution of each use case?
If I would give an answer right now, I would say it's a mix of both, because we're seeing right now a big horizontal has been built many years ago when AI became interesting in the 2000s with GPUs. Since then, we've seen verticals. Now we're seeing again a horizontal that's Gen AI. And now again, we're seeing verticals, agents, we're seeing specialized things. I think we'll keep playing this game, kind of drawing this pattern of building verticals to go high, building horizontals to kind of standardize and kind of have a checkpoint of where the industry is going. So it's a mix of both, I would say.
I also think it's unlikely that OpenAI are not going, or these. I don't think we're going to have a situation where like large language models or large model companies just give up on the small model space. I think that would be a massive strategic error. So I think we're going to find. I think if I was Sam Altman right now, I would be working out, okay, how do I make sure that OpenAI becomes the underlying OS, the underlying operating system for small language model or small model use cases.
And here's an interesting insight from OpenAI. So if you use deep research lately, you might have noticed that there's a limit to the prompt size. So the limit is way lower than with individual models. And the reason for that is deep research uses smaller models in the background. And whenever you pass a big prompt to deep research, it has to be still within the boundaries of the small models deep research uses behind. So it seems like deep research is kind of an agentic framework that delegates some areas of your question to smaller models. That's an interesting insight from my personal usage of deep research. But just to transition to the third and last topic of this podcast, again on the following the insights and surveys theme of this podcast, we're talking about the KPMG survey about enterprise AI and how it's being adopted currently. And the bottom line here is that 65% of big companies are playing with agents. However, only 11% have them in production. Before going details, I'm going to ask you, why do you think we're seeing such a difference between top of funnel and conversion rates?
Top of funnel in what regard exactly? What do we mean by top of funnel here?
Companies playing with agents.
I think the reason is first of all, I don't think the use cases are quite there yet. Like, I don't think I think there's demand and supply side factors. So on the supply side, I don't think companies know how to build AI agent workflows or use cases yet. I think even if they're able to build an AI agent use case, I think even in that scenario, which I think is like less than 1% of companies, most of the time that use case operates within a vacuum. So it's not actually connected to the business's processes or applications that they use in their day-to-day operations. And so its value is very limited, and it's a very slim use case that's disconnected to everything else. So I think that's the supply side problem. And also on the demand side, I think we are guilty of getting caught in our own AI bubble where we think that this is all the average person thinks about or talks about. 90% of people just use ChatGPT, a couple of days a week for a couple of queries, and life hasn't changed very much for them. So I think it's both, and we're still yet to get that kind of really breakout use case within a consumer facing app. Like, even if you think about AI today, how do most people use AI? Most people use AI today by interacting with an AI only app, which is completely disconnected from everything else they use. So we're yet to see these two worlds connect in a meaningful way. And I think that's a big part of it. But what do you think?
It takes a bit of thinking how I can bridge the gap between 65% and 11%. It's clearly a block somewhere. And I think the block, as you said, is kind of dual-sided. On the supply side, companies I think they're overselling. Nice marketing, and what I call toxic marketing. Our agent can do this and that, and you just plug in your data and everything just goes by magic, right? Well, it's not like that. We've played with such tools. We're, let's say, on the more technical side of the general population curve, and we still couldn't run some tools just because what they promise wasn't what was happening in practice. This is on the supply side. On the demand side, as you pointed out, I think companies are not there yet. Companies are not fully integrating AI. They're just playing with AI so they seem cool, so that they can stay on top of the game, put AI on their pitch deck, and claim that they're using the cutting edge technology that exists nowadays. I think looking at this trend for the KPMG survey, I think 2024 was the hype year, while 2025 is kind of shaping up as the year where we measure return on investment, where we apply AI where it makes sense, and where we bridge the gap between what people are actually finding value in and using AI to make their workflows faster. I think there's two types of AI. The AI that's easy to use, the conversational one, let's say, the chat GPTs of this world, and the AI you don't see. The AI that just writes you drafts, the AI that just gives you clients, the AI that just runs behind the hood without you ever knowing it's AI there. And I think the second type of AI will be the one providing real return on investment.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, just as a concluding thought, 65% top of funnel AI agents, 11% production usage. Clearly a lot of the AI use cases aren't actually making it to market. But the interesting thing to me, and I think the reason why we do this podcast, is not what's happening with the general population, but what is happening on the margin. What use cases are growing super fast with a small section of users, whereby they've adopted this use case and none of them have gone back to the way they used to do it before. I think that's the really interesting thing, because the use cases that are being adopted on the margin today are the general purpose use cases in 18 months, 24 months time. But with that, let's wrap it up. I'm running late to about 5 different meetings, so this week has been as interesting as ever, and I think the space continues to evolve. But any concluding thoughts from you before we wrap things up?
Just a quick question. What are you looking forward this week? What's in AI that excites you this week?
Y Combinator are super interested in Manus. So Manus is this kind of agentic AI platform. And honestly, I think DeepSeek was a load of China hype. But essentially, DeepSeek didn't really deliver. It's not really cut through. But I think Manus could potentially be, if the people in Silicon Valley are to be believed, Manus could be the kind of agentic AI platform that breaks through and is China's first big AI success.
Nice. Let's cover Manus next week.
Let's do it. And you? What are you looking forward to in AI?
The results of the last quarter in AI. And we're seeing surveys, we're seeing nice graphs of unicorns being built. I'm trying to wrap my head around what happened last quarter and kind of predict and stay ahead of what's going to be the next big thing in the second quarter of 2025.
Let's get it. Let's see what the Q1 results are. And importantly as well, let's see if Q2 CapEx spending stays the same. I think, the really interesting thing will be, okay, the tariffs are coming, the economic impact is coming. We can all see that we're potentially in the early phases of a recession. What happens to AI spending in a recession? This is another test for the AI industry, I think. Time-stamped. Okay, cool. Great. Thank you so much, Mihai, as ever, for another episode of the podcast. We will see you guys again this time next week. Cheers.